welcome to Reptile Fight Club. I guess if you're hearing this, you found us, so welcome. I guess I thought I'd switch it up a little bit with the intro.
Right? That was interesting, exciting, novel.
Probably not the best idea to switch it up, but all right, here we are. Reptile Fight Club. I'm Justin Julander, and with me is Bob Rock, Mr. Rob Stone. How you doing?
I'm good.
Excellent. All right. Now, last time we recorded, you kind of hinted at something you were going to attempt, but you didn't say too much about it. So I'm very curious. What was
okay. Yeah. So it was my first trip to Southeast Colorado to try and find a Massasauga. It seems like...
Did you go up on me another tick?
I did not. I did not. So yeah, never fear as to that. Yeah. I hadn't been down that way. And so the Cope Park survey is always in the midsummer. And it was actually the week before. And as part of their venture, they went down there, with a group of, and obviously different vehicles and all that, but something like 70 or 80 people.
Oh, wow.
And so it seems like a cool deal. I do the local ones. Every year it seems like they also have a local one. I haven't done this one down in Southeast Colorado. I know you'll have heard about it because Mike Pingleton has gone several times and I think recorded some episodes at one a handful of years ago. So it's kind of that area. And they had gone on that the week before. I wasn't able to do that. And so it was like, hey, let's try our own little attempt there. As a part of their survey, they had found one Massasauga. So it's certainly possible, but that I think it's either early or late, depending on which way you look at it, so that they're more of a spring and fall. And that habitat, I think, is a little bit marginal. There's sort of closer or further might actually be better. And we kind of saw some of that on the way back. And so ideas going forward for sure. Most of the cool things that we saw were actually mammals or birds. There were a bunch of burrowing owls that were very cool.
Yeah, those are neat.
So those were super cool. And it was cool to see their kind of the holes and things. It was like, are these prairie dogs? No, they have like this weird kind of conical structure on the top. And I was like, I think these are the owls, and there were pellets in around various ones and stuff. So that was pretty neat.
Nice.
And then we saw a badger. I went with my buddy Andy Gillick, and we saw a badger that crossed the road in front of us, and it stopped off to the side right at dusk. And he was very funny because I slowed down so that he was right outside the door of the truck. And he had so he scooted across and then backed up, so he's facing the road. He's so he's perpendicular to me.
Oh, cool.
And he did a sort of the shoulder thrust forward position, kind of assumed this position. And then it clearly, gave off the vibe of, I could totally take you, I just don't feel like doing it today. He did the backward shuffle into the grass. So it was really cool.
That's awesome.
That was probably my favorite. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I love badgers. I've only seen them maybe a small handful of times, but yeah, every time I see them, I try to get closer, go to check them out. Yeah. I had one kind of thing where we were driving along and this badger was high stepping. He was carrying a dead prairie dog in his mouth, high stepping across the road to carry this big rodent. It was pretty sweet. But I really like badgers. I got to pet one during my undergrad at Weber State. There was somebody that came through with a bunch of, rehabbed wildlife, and one, they had found this baby badger that its mother had been killed or something, and they brought it in. You could go up and pet it, and it was like this little lap dog type badger. It was pretty crazy. Yeah. I said, so, no, he doesn't like go off on you every once in a while. No, he's a sweet little guy, but he was kind of younger too. So who knows if they get grumpy as they get older, but such a cool animal. But
absolutely.
The world needs more badger experiences.
I wouldn't mind it, especially, so long as everyone stays on their own side. They might be, marginally far away friends, as we would say. So.
Yeah. I definitely like seeing them though. They're really cool. Yeah, you don't mess with mustelids though. They'll rip you up. There was a wolverine that was making its way through like the salt flats of the Great Salt Lake a couple years back, and I was really tempted to go out and try to see it. Just when do you get the chance to see a wolverine, especially running through town? Basically, pretty crazy.
That's wild.
Yeah, insane. So really weird experience there, but I never made the drive. I guess it was a rare reptile. I might have done it.
Right.
Yeah. But I don't know. That'd be probably more rare than any reptile in Utah, seeing a wolverine. But yeah, I've always had a fascination with the skunks and their allies and badgers.
Absolutely.
They're really cool animals. Well, nice. Sounds like good time to get away and go see some cool stuff. And
a learning trip for sure.
Yeah. It's always nice to kind of have those exploratory trips to make sure you get know the area a little bit, where you need to look and things like that. So that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and for the record, I would not be sad if you got another tick on the Crotalus belt or whatever.
Protolid belt, yes.
I hate to give that imagery of having a Crotalus belt, but what do you do? More power to you and good luck in your ventures. But yeah, and I'm not going to gloat that you didn't find one, because I would have been very happy for you if you found one. Yeah, we
saw a couple prairies that had been hit, which are down that area and are more common. It seems like the Massasaugas have a more specific habitat type, whereas prairies are super generalist, as we've seen. And I would say, as ever, the lesson was, despite being in otherwise very sparsely populated areas, I never cease to be amazed by how much traffic goes through some of those spots, even in the middle of the night. It's totally bizarre.
It's crazy. Sometimes you're just like, where are these people going?
Where are they coming from and where are they going? I have to think that that a lot of us seeing that, and maybe we even talked about this when we were in Utah, is the proliferation and availability of cell phones and apps, wayfinding apps, that I think a lot of these roads probably even 15, 20 years ago would not have been nearly so popular if people weren't so confident that it would go where they hoped it would go and that sort of thing.
And they couldn't tell if it was a good, solid road, or if it was
right. Is this a main road that will take me where I want to go or not? And I think the traffic has, sort of expanded off of maybe some of the major thoroughfares with more confidence in, this one actually does connect and go through, and I can take the scenic way, and it might take only a little bit longer despite being further because there's so much less traffic and things.
Yeah. How far did you have to travel to get to the spot?
Probably we'd gone 3.5 hours or so. We kind of went a circuitous way to get through some different habitat, and doing it ourselves, but certainly intentionally, both to avoid traffic and to be in habitat for longer. Probably 3.5 to 4 hours each way. Something.
Okay, that's not too terrible. But I mean, if it's just over the course of a day, or was it? Did you stay overnight?
2 nights. The first one we got rained out. The second night, it was bizarre. I mean, kind of one of those nights so there was storms in the afternoon, but around us, not through us. Whereas the previous night they'd kind of come in. We've been through this where they come in late and then it gets dark and it's really cooled it down and it's wet. So it was very much a toady night. And then the next night, the storm cells actually kind of went around the area that we were in, very close to it, as close as you could get without getting wet, basically. So big pressure drop, but the temperature stayed up, felt really snaky, save for being a full moon. And essentially a coach whip had been hit during the day, those 2 prairies at night. And then the next morning we found a hognose in a different spot that had been hit the night before. But a new place to see hognose. I've never seen, I've never been down there, so I wouldn't have seen hognose there. But big female. The other interesting thing with your avian love is we were out at one spot And it was the first time, I think, in my life that I've seen a shrike kill site where there were lizards actively
really?
hanging on.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there
Crazy.
was one that must have been from the day before, because so it was just at the hips. It was an earless lizard at the hips,
Uh-huh.
hips and tail, and it had ants kind of going at the at the exposed bit, and then the second barbed wire rosette down had the remnants of clearly one from a week ago or 2 weeks ago. So I took some pictures of that. I'll have to send them to you.
Oh,
But
that's crazy. Yeah, I haven't seen
I
that
don't know.
before. That's
Yeah,
really neat.
it was very cool and very, as I say, very fresh. The part that remained looked great. So that was actually really, kind of a lot of natural history thing. The badger, this sort of thing. A lot of cool things in that vein, but not a lot of live snakes until the next morning.
Okay. What'd you see?
And even then, I think
you saw?
So. A Western yellow belly racer that on a dirt road in a tire track. So it was one of those where you pass it and you slowly back up. And I wound up essentially then being too close to it, so I kind of freaked it out and wasn't able to run it down. But it was I would say it was probably a yearling, or coming up on a yearling. So it was still not color changed, but it was probably 18 to 20 inches long, which was cool. I found them as babies before, but never a larger one that hasn't changed color yet.
And I've only seen a DOR baby, which is strange because I see adults all the time around here. So I don't know why I don't see juveniles. I guess they're just more secretive, or they don't make as much noise for my old ears to hear. I don't know. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. But the one I'd seen, I actually wound up hiking it up. Actually, at the Co-Park thing a couple of years back, there was a group of us hiking, and it just took off. And that one I was able to get. This one the other day it wasn't. And then two other, I don't race, Masticophis of some variety, very dark Masticophis. I don't think they were yellow bellies, but I don't know what else is actually down that way. So whether they were coach whips or
your coach whips,
I'm not sure, but very dark.
That's cool.
And they were super heated, so they were just gone.
Gone, yeah. The striped whip snakes, kind of like that plain or prairie land, and they're darker usually. Like like the ones around in Utah, like where we were looking for the mountain kings on our way over to Moab. They around there they're about black, with some stripes, of course, as their name implies. But striped whip snakes are fun. But very fast, especially if they're heated up.
So, but that was cool. It was good.
Nice. I went up yesterday. It's the birthday of Utah yesterday. So the 24th of July is our founder day. So we had the day off of work, and I went up on a hike up at a place where I've, seen quite a few different, not a few different species, but a lot of racers and rubber boas. It's a really good spot for that, but it was hot and I saw nothing. But for some reason, I figured it was time to start running again. So I ran on Monday and my legs are just wrecked. It's like 2.5 miles and it killed me about. So I'm trying to get through that. So yesterday I'm like, I got to hike or do something active, or else these legs are just going to fall off. So I got out and did a couple miles up in the mountains, and it was nice. I saw a few birds that I hadn't seen this year yet. So that was cool, but no herps at all. There were millions of grasshoppers. Like it was just inundated.
Absolutely.
With grasshoppers.
Yeah. The area we had gone, same deal. There were 2 spots in particular where it seemed like you took a step and 10 of them or 15 of them just shot off in every direction.
Yeah,
totally wild.
It sure makes looking for snakes difficult if you have all that noise from the grasshoppers, because a lot of when they're small, like in the spring, the grasshoppers are either non-existent or very small, and so they're not making that much noise, and you can discern if there's a snake or a lizard moving through the nearby area. But when there's just grasshoppers everywhere, it just wrecks. It's kind of like having cicadas scream at you as you were looking for rattlesnakes, just not a good mix. But usually it's around the time the reptiles stop coming out. But I guess I was surprised. I would expect to see maybe some yellow belly racers out there, but they're probably already gorged and beyond capacity. That's I read in part of a paper that was talking about the diet of maybe it was in the Snakes of Arizona book, but it was talking about the yellow bellied racers in Utah. They're like, what did they say? 97% of their diet is grasshoppers. That was kind of an interesting factoid. Yeah. Kind of cool to think about an insectivorous snake that's quite large.
Right. Gets large. Yeah.
Yeah. But no shortage of grasshoppers. That's for sure.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Yeah.
The one other note that I wanted to bring up was, did find and catch a lesser earless lizard, I believe, that it only, and I think you've talked about this sort of in the context of Australia, but so it only had one eye, which certainly made it easier to catch. Yeah. But it was interesting because it was like a full-sized animal. Point one. Point two would be the habitat. As I was standing there holding it, I was like, wow, this is just like the habitat of the ones we saw in Utah, which, again, probably makes sense. But that same exact style of habitat. And I was just impressed that as an adult, looked like adult female, that it had made it despite it was just completely gone. There was some black color distortion, so I would think it was probably a loss rather than congenital or being born without it. But super interesting.
That's cool. Yeah, I really, after seeing them there in Utah, I just really am geeking out on those. But yeah, it looks like there's a pretty healthy population down there in southeastern Colorado. That's pretty cool. But yeah, I really enjoyed seeing those for the first time. So they're cool species for sure. Yep. Well, are we ready to do a little fighting?
Sure.
All right. We've got a topic about, so I guess your purchase of some older, I don't know, you wouldn't call them field guides. They're more like trip reports or something kind of along the same vein as Clobber, I guess. No. Yeah. Clobber. No.
Caulfield. That's what you're thinking.
Gosh, I keep calling Caulfield Clobber. Sorry. Caulfield along that vein where they're kind of talking about their trips and what they're finding and things. Is that kind of the idea? But anyway, those books and if they're relevant today, like if they are helpful to read those and understand those for modern day herping. So I thought that would make an interesting topic. May not be a very long one today, but thought we'd chat about that. So let's go ahead and flip the coin and see which side we want to take. Either it's helpful or not so helpful. So go ahead and call it. We'll see if your win streak continues.
I'll say heads.
It's heads. Your win streak continues. So
the win streak continues.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
The tides have turned, or the winds have changed. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, very good. There was some disjunct, an aphorism or whatever that I was searching for. So the tides have turned or something, but I couldn't pull it out.
Oh, right, the turn tides have
turn tides have upside down. But nevertheless, I don't know. I'm curious what I'd rather defer the choice. So you pick what you'd like to do, because I'm happy to do either. I have thoughts for both.
Yeah, maybe I'll go with the not helpful side. I'll let you go with the helpful side, because I think you'll do a good job. You want to go first, or are you going to chuck me?
I'll check you this time. Why not?
Sounds good. I'll enjoy being chucked. All right. Well, obviously, with books written in the early 1900s or mid 1900s, lots of things have changed. Some sites might not even be sites anymore. They might be a copper mine or, a Walmart or something like that. So, that's kind of the obvious low hanging fruit of, these books are out of date. And for the, excuse me, just a second. For the most part, when you publish something, it's pretty much out of date the minute the book is printed. So it's kind of a tricky thing. Now, of course, that's not true for everything, but I think that's kind of the major drawback of some of these things is you could hear about this reptile utopia, head out there and find that it's covered with a Walmart or something like that. So that's kind of the lead I'd take there. And that, even if it hasn't changed, there's potential for different, invasive species to move in, or there's, other ideas. I guess maybe I'll save those for the later points, but I guess the fact that things change and change is ever present, and it's usually a destructive change that you don't really bounce back from. So unfortunately, but yeah, I'd start with that.
Well, obviously that's a fair point, right? And certainly something that we've seen some places. We don't necessarily see in everything, right? We have been to spots in the New Jersey Pine Barrens that were literally, I think they more or less are identical to certainly they're identical to what was described in the, Snakes and Snake Hunting from 1957. The habitat of the old quarry and all that is identical, right? So it's very easy to visualize that. I would say that the principal value, more so than an explicit location, is if those previous books, which Caulfield generally did very well with, was describing the context. So not only is it saying it's place X, it's putting a great a ton of detail into what the habitat conditions are like, or the sort of ancillary conditions are like, that maybe there's a value to being able to take that now and say, okay, well, what still exists that mimics the conditions that are described there, even if that particular place, whether that place is there or not, right? Yeah. As we highlight, I do think herping the Pine Barrens is always hard. It's quite possibly even harder at those places that have been publicly known about for 65 or 70 years, right? And so probably a source of inspiration for more than just us. And it does remind me. So I was reading, you might guess why, I was reading the Obscurus chapter in the Snakes of Arizona book, which was written by Dave Barker. And he actually goes explicitly into sort of the impact of both Caulfield's books, principal books, because in his second book, he talked about going to the Animas Mountains and finding Obscurus and sort of the impact of increased traffic associated with that. And, in his lifetime, Caulfield took heat associated with sort of publicizing spots, even, going back to our conversation from last week. But as Dave sort of distills the argument, his argument at that point was, well, it had been published in scientific literature that they occurred in the Animas Mountains and all that. And Dave did make the point that, yes, that's true. Simultaneously, Caulfield's reach is almost inarguably much broader. And so it's, not exactly the same thing. So it's still a contentious issue, as we highlighted last week, but certainly a point of interest. So I think there is utility to the extent that they go into explicit description, and it's not reliant upon just sort of a name that might not even clearly convey absent its context, right? We talked about Big Hill in the context of the River Road last week, sort of within the Alterna lingo, so to speak, that has a meaning, but it wouldn't be all that surprising if, today outside of that community or 20 years from now, that's not nearly as clear what that means, right? Yeah. So if the focus was instead on being super explicit about what that habitat looked like, that would have a lot more utility than just, let alone mile marker X. Well, the highway could move, and then it's truly meaningless, right? It's all about the description of the habitat. So
canyon names might change, or things like that. So it might be tricky in some way. You might be going on a wild goose chase for a name of a place that doesn't exist anymore, or this certain family farm that sold out and the new owners changed it, or now it's private property. We found that in Western Australia. We had this location of a good spot to find one of the spiny-tailed skinks. We wanted to see all the spiny-tailed skinks in their natural environment. And we went to this spot that was supposed to be really great for them. And there was a big fence in the way, and there was some mining company that was setting up shop. And we're like, oh, that's awesome. But we picked a neighboring hill, and it was success. We found some of the ones we were looking for. So it was, reasonable, but, that kind of development, might get in the way a little bit. But I think, as far as like national parks go, they're probably going to stay the same, or maybe expand a little bit over time or something like that. And the fact that they're, like we talked about last week, patrolled and kept safe that way is probably a good place to look at, especially if they're described in a book like that. But also when a spot becomes popular, I guess you're kind of alluding to this, but they get maybe over collected or over visited. And so, even if, I guess depending on the species, of course, but there's a chance that the numbers could dwindle because of increased visitation. But I don't know that would really be due to a book, but maybe in some instances you could kind of point to it. I think Dave might be a little hard on Caulfield because, I don't know. It's hard to say like he's the only reason that anybody went there, because there's so few places to find Obscurus in the US anyway. It's like, two or three good spots, and it's the word's going to make the rounds regardless of who put it in a book or who put it in a scientific publication. It's really kind of hard to point the finger at one person for that. But am I rambling now? I'm probably in the ramble mode, so maybe you should take over.
No, I think that's fair. I honestly, in reading it, I thought that reading Dave's piece on that specific component, I thought that there was probably some fair elements to it, and others, where it's maybe sort of his perception, which could be accurate, or it could be exaggerated or biased by his own experience, where he was saying, and I think there is something to the fact that like the amount of popular herpetologically related literature was much less abundant, right? At the time that the Caulfield's books were coming out in the late 50s and late 60s, right? That those really were sort of, especially something that would then be popularly available at local libraries and things like that, Dave even talks about it in the context of, his suggestion. And I think in the same vein, right, this ignores the reality that, libraries don't always keep all their books forever, but, he highlights how many library copies are out and about in the world, and, speaking both to their popularity and maybe to the popularity of, or willingness of young herpers to make that their own book rather than the library's book and all that. So it's sort of interesting. It's certainly interesting. I don't know that it's 100% as cut and dry as maybe it's sort of suggested in there, but nevertheless, certainly interesting.
It didn't take me too long maybe I'm a nerd or something, but like I remember going to the library and I would really geek out if I could go to like a university library, like the University of Utah or something like that, go into their herpetology section or even their herpetology journal section and look through, the different issues of herpetological publications and try to find chapters on species I was interested in, things like that, to see if I could find additional information about a species I was interested in. So, I don't think just having a popular, anybody who's into reptiles kind of the extent we are is probably going to learn those tricks of the trade, if you want to call them that, in regards to locating different species. And I think that was a big thing about scientific publication before they realized that it could be potentially an avenue for people to either illicitly collect or to, negatively impact a population. They would give out, locations and where they did their studies and things like that. So, and even if they didn't say the exact location, a lot of times their figures would have like a mountain range or something where you could tie it back to, especially in our modern day, tie it back to a physical location and find out, where they were looking and things. And I think there was a really nice example of that with the Gila Monster publication from the maybe the 80s or 90s. And I was able to find the mountain, find the topology of the publication and link it to the direct spot. And so I could see where Gila monsters were found in that study. And I've spent a lot of time in that area where the publication was made. And I think I've only seen one Gila monster in that area in, 20 years since I've been looking down there, since I've known about that spot. So just because where something has been found, especially in an old publication or in an old book, doesn't mean you're necessarily going to have any easier time finding them, even if you know the exact location where they were found. So you still have to put in the work, and you still have to get lucky to some extent to be able to find these things. So that's why, I guess maybe that's more in on your side of they actually can be helpful, but at the same time, maybe the population dynamics have changed, or, they're not really locally abundant in that spot anymore. And so, you might spend a lot more time looking and less time finding, but it's hard to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really do think that's sort of the key, right? Is the level, the quality of description. The other thing I wanted to highlight that I found super fascinating, and I found in the context of the Kaufeld books that, I didn't find in that context, but I found it super useful in terms of getting utility out of those books, was if you go on to the, I know in the herpological community, we have certain feelings around the USGS, but certainly their 7.5 and 15-minute topographical maps are super interesting. And all the more so previously, and I'm sure you'll remember these days, you had to order those maps, and, you'd have to, or go to the shops that would have, specific ones. And there are obviously so many depending on the level of granularity that you're looking at. But nowadays, that's an entirely free online resource, so that you can actually pull those up, and they have all the different versions of them for a particular area. So you can seek out the specific spot that's of interest, and then you can even see what the 15-minute map looked like that was published in 1890 for that area. So that you can take Kaufeld's stuff and say, you can look at it and say, okay, well, actually, I think he even makes mention in there on occasion of, I was in the Huachucas when I went in 1924. Well, I can pick up, you can go online and you can find and even print out. You take it to FedEx Kinko's. It takes the big printer to be able to do it right. But, you can print out the 15-minute topographical map for the Huachucas from 1917 that almost certainly is what he was using as sort of his roadmap to that area, and really get a sense for the habitat and things. And I mean, it's amazing, right? Yet another example of the really cool resources that are available to us now.
For sure. Yeah. And I imagine the roads might be a little better condition, and the vehicles we're traveling in will get us there a little quicker too. So I can't imagine traveling around there in 1924. He's probably on horseback or something, but yeah, it's pretty cool.
For at least some of it.
All right. So I think, we've covered some of the, low-hanging fruit, the easy parts of the topic. I really kind of was more interested in some of your thoughts regarding now my mind blanked out. The experiential type aspects of books, and kind of, I don't know, have you had instances of that where you're, the book is coming alive, or you're getting, something out of the book, even maybe if you're in a different spot?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the Kaufeld books are really great for that, right? And part of it is the narrative flow, where he's really explaining in detail sort of the experience of doing it. in a way that, I mean, you feel like you're there, whether you've been to that, you know, it comes alive most if you've been to the spots that he's talking about. But even then, I mean, I think I've read the books, you know, a half dozen times at least each and all that sort of thing. So obviously it's creating a feeling in me. Either way, I just read that Herping Texas book I think we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And I thought that does an excellent job as well. Nipper just sent me a book from it's 1961, Snake Dance, The Snake Dance of the Hopi Indians.
Cool.
Which I've just started checking out. But yeah, super interesting, right? From Western Lore Press, you know, in celebration of our recent trip and our multiple Hopi rattlesnakes and things. So yeah, I'm eager to dig into that one. So that's really cool. So yeah, I think the other thing that happens, maybe because of it's almost like I feel like social media and YouTube, there's a natural tendency to make it seem easier than it is, right? So it's almost like there's a celebration of easy success where just the narrative form of a book almost works in the opposite direction, where maybe it sort of incentivizes playing up the challenge that went into it. I'm a little surprised that, you know, Nick hasn't written a book about field herping, because that would seem to be a natural narrative flow for him. He always loves the grand adventure, you know, and this is all the things that happen. Maybe that's an idea for him. You should pitch it. Is like so I feel like there's some natural tendency to go in that direction in the written form. And maybe part of that is just we as readers then have more autonomy to picture it as being even more intense and more of a struggle and all the grand epic adventure. Whereas if we're just watching the YouTube video, well, it couldn't have been that bad. They were still filming a YouTube video. They didn't even, you know, the camera's not even shaking.
Yeah. Right. And I think too, you know, you get the almost the instant gratification nature of a YouTube, where it's like, okay, we're hitting this area, you know, let's see what we find. Oh, we found everything we were looking for, you know, an end of video, and if they don't find it, it's not on the internet, you know, so there's no point posting if they don't find what they're looking for. And so that's kind of another, you know, I like that, bringing that out about, you know, the book aspect of, you know, the challenge and the time it takes, because it's long form, so you can do a little bit more, and explain a little bit more and have more detail. And you need to fill pages, or else, you know, people are going to feel like they didn't get their money's worth with your pamphlet of a book. Like, we went looking for this and we eventually found it. The end. You know, you want some details on it, I'm sure. So I do think, you know, books are really, the book's always better than the movie, I guess we could say, you know, with the, in regards to YouTube and, you know, herping. I agree, that, you know, it makes it seem like it's much easier than it is, because herping can be pretty, daunting and you know, just rough on you. And then you may not see anything, you know, it's, or you might miss out on your target and it was really rough and you have to go back there again or something, you know. I think everybody shared the same sentiment when we went down the Grand Canyon. That was, thank goodness we found one, so we don't have to do that again, you know. No, but my daughters were like, okay, now you've been there, now you can show us around. So I'm like, oh yeah, I would like to see it in the daytime. I think that would be fun. So that was the only downside of doing it in the dark, is you didn't get the views. But for somebody with a little nervousness of heights, that might be a better thing to not constantly see the heights and depths that await you if you misstep. So I'm sure you guys were probably a little happy about that, but
yeah, I don't know, honestly, whether that improves it or detracts, right? So instead it's a gaping black void. So I don't know. I'd probably have to experience it to know, you know, with certainty. I think certainly that was part of my ideation, beyond the fact that this is the process that I thought would maximize our chance of finding the animal. But, you know, was saying, and just for the record here, and I've already clarified it with Phil, because I thought I really enjoyed the recap, the dual trip recap version that Nipper and Phil did together on Venom Exchange Radio. But just to clarify, so the camping spots in the Grand Canyon are exceedingly competitive. So, Phil and Nipper went into a lot of conversation about, you could stay down there at Cottonwood, or, all the various places that are down there. And as I understand it, it's sort of a lottery-based system that opens up, X number of months or a year before the date of a specific date that you're going to try and be there and all this stuff. So it's definitely doable. People absolutely do it. That being said, it's not just like, you just sort of turn up and, you could cowboy camp off the thing and see if someone hassles you or they don't. It's not like someone that night would have been an issue if we were just sort of sleeping on the bench there for half an hour or whatever. But I think that's probably fine. But just for the form of the thing, that's a highly competitive thing that people definitely do and are interested in. But accordingly, and that speaks to it again, right? Maybe it wouldn't be my thing, but the value of going to places that people go to for its own sake, when we're out doing this, there's definitely a cool aspect to that. But in this context, it makes it more challenging in terms of our flexibility. Yeah,
that's very true. And I think, and just to correct the record, Phil mentioned that part of the Grand Canyon lies in Utah, and unfortunately that is not the case anymore. The original state of Deseret did encompass the Grand Canyon, as well as San Diego and most of Arizona and most of Nevada. So when it became a state, they had to give up a lot of land to other future states or present states, I guess, to what it is now. But we still have 5 national parks, so it's nothing to shake a stick at. But is that a good advertisement for Utah? But I think that the idea of and I think I know Eric's talked about it, and also Keith, writing a book about kind of your experiences, and Keith's more maybe towards the herpetocultural side, but I know Eric wants to write a book about his adventures in herpland. And I think probably all of us should, or have aspirations to do so, to kind of put down on paper their adventures and their recollections of finding animals. And I think, there is something to say about doing that sooner than later, because, as we well see on the different reports and different people recounting the experience, it changes. And I know from my own experience that those things change in time as well. So, there is a possibility, and this may be a drawback to books, is that they're remembering it incorrectly, or they're getting things out of order, or, they were there a different month than they describe. And so you might be basing things off of this faulty.
We got to go in May.
When in fact, exactly.
Absolutely.
And so, go ahead.
Well, and certainly too, right? Changing climactic conditions and things, right? We're perpetually sort of seeing that, where whatever would have been the perfect time to go would be X. Heck, we saw it last year with the overly, probably double average that we, between Utah and Colorado moisture, right? Versus this year, which is possibly even coming in under, just sort of that variability. And if we said, this is the time frame that you need to do, as opposed to really highlighting what it was about those conditions that, to some extent probably will exist. It's just in any given year, but it's just going to be a question of how long within the year and what the timing looks like. Those could be different. So certainly whatever happened in, 1945, right? It's more important to know, the weather underground functionality is very cool. Nevertheless, I think probably better served just listening to the description. Yeah. And how much do we trust it, even if it does?
Right. Yeah. What weather station was it bouncing off of, and how close was that to the site? But I agree, with the changing weather patterns and even, year to year, you might have hit on a perfect year. I bring up the spotted leaf nose snake again, because, that one trip they were everywhere. There was no shortage of spotted leaf nose snakes everywhere. And then in other trips, we haven't turned them up. It's just one of those things where you either scratch your head or you do it enough that you figure out when they're out. And, if you're reporting a single trip and it was a huge success, you might have just been really lucky and you just hit the exact day that everything was moving. And I mean, it seems like my Florida trip had a little bit of that aspect to it, where everything was moving and people don't normally experience that. But to me, where I have an N of 2, half the trips were fantastic and the other half were not so great. But, other than hiking through the Everglades section of the Everglades National Park where we were the first time I went, 10, 15 years ago, there were a ton of alligators everywhere. So based on that experience, I was telling my wife, Heidi, we're going to see a lot of alligators. They're going to be everywhere. And then we saw one, grand total of one alligator. And so, it just year to year will vary too. And so, and I think that really highlights how important it is to visit different areas more than once. And, especially if they're close to home or you want to get to know the areas and the reptiles really well. I think multiple visits is in order. And I think you're really good about doing that, planning trips and going back to the same areas, maybe different times of year and things like that. Now, it becomes more difficult if you're flying somewhere, especially if you're going over to Australia or something, there's no real easy way to, whereas like outside right now, it's kind of overcast and a little bit rainy, whereas it was hot maybe 2 hours ago. So I'm thinking I'm going to go drive around as soon as we're done here, see if I can see something on the road, because that's
see a rubber bow, maybe.
That's what we're able to do. Yeah. When it's close to home, we can drive 15 minutes or half an hour and go see some local stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other point, that kind of you were leading us to, and then I diverted us by talking about whatever it always is. I think just as either as a casual reader or someone who reads quite a bit, I do think there's just really something compelling about sort of those first person narratives to this, to the venture that we enjoy, right? To the common cause, even if we're not there, haven't been to that area, or, certainly not in those contexts, weren't a part of that trip or whatever. Just the joy in sort of, I think it's just it's really compelling in its ability to put you into that place, right? And that's sort of, it obviously is the skill of the author, but it's also just really is that common cause of saying, hey, I can relate to this notion of this venture, right? And really have confidence and enjoy it.
Yeah, for sure. I remember on my first trip to Australia, I had recently read that book, Stalking the Plumed Serpent. I can't remember who the author is. I was looking for it, but I can't see it.
Bruce Means, I think.
Was it Bruce? Okay. Yeah, here it is. Bruce Means. Yep. And he was talking about finding green tree pythons, and I just happened to find myself in green tree python territory where he was looking. And so, we'd spent time walking through the forest and looking for green trees and hadn't found any. And then I remembered reading, like, he would just drive along the road and look into the, forest, and that's how they found them. And so I said, hey, let's give this a try. And sure enough, 10 minutes later, we had our green tree python and we were staring at it, in stunned silence. So, just really helpful to see those firsthand experiences, especially if you're in the same spot. You can, get lucky like they did, or it might also not work. There's plenty of people that go to the Iron Range, and when you can drive there is not the best time to find green tree pythons there in a lot of cases. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. But yeah, I agree. I do like reading these herp adventure type books, where they're talking about their trips and their experiences and seeing the kind of highs and lows, of like getting eaten by bugs. I think that would be a very important part of our stories. You picking off 100 or 300 seed ticks off your pant leg or your legs or whatever, and throwing them back onto me in the back seat. Those kind of things is kind of what makes these herp trips, and it also gives people a better insight into, it is good to talk about them on the podcast and relay some of those stories, but if you have time to really put it down on the page and really remember all the details and add everything, that's something something special in the end. So I hope that you and Eric and everybody kind of goes through with writing those herp adventure books, because I think that'd be a really great read.
Yeah, I kind of think maybe, so one of the things that I really liked about that Herping Texas book is that it's actually two authors who, so some of the narratives are trips they've taken singularly, and some of them are trips they've taken together. And actually the idea that it sort of engendered in me, in combination with the Lost Frogs and Hot Snakes, is sort of some cross effort there of saying maybe the answer is sort of almost, I'd rather have it be that, you know, amongst the people that have gone on the trips, each person writes about a different trip or several different trips or the trips to these different areas or whatever. And then, you know, I or several of us could be the editor in that functionality of saying like, hey, actually, so technically I want to hear your perspective more than I want to hear mine, but at the same time to maintain sort of as an audit on the accuracy of those sorts of, I don't know, that might be interesting. I'm just saying you get those multiple voices, and it makes it far more achievable, I think, you know, in terms of saying like, okay, and what's the point of focus, right? And we've seen this, right? So Owen's point of focus on the Arizona trip that he had gone on was sort of the venture where we decided to put in some work after he'd put away a 1.5 pound burrito, right? So that was really the thing that was his, you know, focal point. Obviously, you know, he likes seeing the quabra and the willardi and all this stuff, but that was like, to him, that's the core memory of that trip. Whereas for me, it's not, you know, because that wasn't,
it wasn't very successful. We didn't find anything.
Right.
I had to run to the bathroom before I exploded.
Exactly.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to put that out of my memory. Owen keeps bringing it up. No.
Right. Absolutely. So I think that actually might be interesting, you know, in the same vein of saying, okay, well, what would that look like in terms of saying, okay, here are the ones we have, who's, you know, sort of a tiered ranking, you know, a ranked choice voting sort of situation where it's like, which is the ones you want to talk about the most, you know, or whatever, figure out whose favorite one that is. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's an interesting idea that was sort of an inspiration that I took from those things that I think might be a more practical, more doable version, you know, and it really does remind me, Craig Trumbauer's 2 books, right? More Than Snake Hunting and Even More Than Snake Hunting. He's talked about on both in the book and then on the podcast and privately or whatever, right? That his motivation for writing it was mostly so that his relatives would understand sort of this thing that was so important to him, even more so than the fact that it's, you know, he was inspired by Caulfield and that, you know, he was touched by that and hoped to touch other people, but really it was that was his focus. And, you know, I think that's a goal that we can all sort of relate and aspire to and all that. So
for sure. Yeah. I remember, you know, hanging out with Casey Lazick and hearing some of his stories and thinking, how cool would that be to read that in a book? And I kept, you know, kind of begging him almost like, dude, you need to write a book, like write these stories down, because I just can't get enough of them. I just love hearing his stories. And he said, well, you know, I don't know. kind of hemming and hawing about it. And I'm like, oh man, how sad is that those stories are only, you know, going to live in my terrible memory of what the stories, you know, were. And, instead of, you know, having that, in a solid form to read and reread. So I'll keep working on him, because I really would just selfish reasons, even if he only published, you know, a handful of copies for friends or something. Yeah. Just to have that, history and that legacy, you know, live on the page, I think is very helpful. And, you know, people like Caulfield, that's great. You know, that's really cool. And there's other people that will never write a book, and they've had probably tenfold greater stories than Caulfield. Sure. And we'll never know about them because they didn't write them down, or, you know, that kind of thing. So I think, you know, whoever's listening, if this strikes you right, write it down, even if it's just for your family or your close friends. But maybe somebody down the road will say, no, this is really cool. Let's get this published and get it out there to the people. So I don't know. That's that's, I guess, my plug from this discussion is write those things down so people can enjoy them other than just the people who you experienced it with. But I like that idea of doing kind of an edited compilation of trips that were experienced together. And then, we could each kind of look over them and either correct the record.
I'm sure there will be
things like that.
Or just, hey, what about this thing? You forgot to say.
Yeah, you forgot this funny story or this experience. Yeah, I think that's really beneficial. And then everybody can author a chapter or two, and it'd be really cool. Yeah. I like it. Let's do it.
Right? I think so. So for what it's worth as well, I would point out that I hadn't noted this at the time, but we had talked about it because an author in the Lost Frogs and Hot Snakes book is a professor at your university. Yeah, so actually the editor of the entire book is also an adjunct professor at your university.
Who's that? Do you remember the name? Or do you
Martha Crump.
Okay.
Who adjunct professor in the Department of Biology at USU. In Northern Arizona. Yeah.
Oh, wow. She must be at Northern Arizona then and just an adjunct at USU. That's interesting. I know some people, especially in the herp department, where I go try to bother them and pick their brain or that kind of thing. But I only know a couple these days. Like there was one really cool herp professor, Joe Mendelson. And I got to go on a herp trip because Ben Morrill was in the herp class. And so he's like, hey, can my friend come too? And so he got me invited to the herp trip, and it was fantastic. I mean, we found all sorts of cool stuff and got to know some different areas and did a lot of herping on the Beaver Dam slope and stuff. So really cool trip. And we found some really great stuff, but just meeting Joe and hearing his stories was, kind of one of those things where I hope he writes a book because he's got some crazy stories about, one was where he was on a herp trip out in the middle of nowhere in Central America somewhere. And one of the graduate students brought a bag and said, oh, here's this. And it was like some harmless snake. He reached in the bag, pulled it out right as it bit him. He realized that was not a harmless snake. It was a very venomous snake. And then he realized he was too far from any medical care to do anything about it. So he just sat on the edge of a cliff and watched the sunset and thinking, well, this might be my last sunset, like what else can I do? Just kind of the Zen moment of it is what it is. It's going to be what it's going to be. And obviously he survived to tell me the story, but what a crazy experience that would be. And I'm of course leaving out a lot of details, but
sure.
Be interesting to remember what snake he thought what the graduate student thought it was and what he realized it was. And, but yeah, cool stories all around. And I'm sure these professors that are doing, month-long trips or whatever, we need to have another professor on from Utah State, Susanna French. She does research in the Galapagos and the, Cayman Islands, that kind of on different iguana species. So I'm sure she'd have some great stories and we'll have to get her on. But I don't want to bring them on and make them fight with us. So I'm kind of like trying to figure out if our podcast can fit other things other than fighting, but there may be some places we can get them to come on and discuss a topic, so we'll have to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, Eric, and we've talked about this a bit, but I've had some of that same ideation, and maybe we'll keep this feed clean and put it in other homes people would recognize that would make sense or whatever, and we can continue with our strong theme here, or we could not, those are conversations to be decided going forward or whatever. But I think certainly there's definitely a space for people that, aren't, at least I know I'm not hearing elsewhere, and I know have compelling and interesting stories that I'd like to hear.
Yeah. Whether or not they're willing to do a podcast remains to be seen, but I'm sure
that's Susanna, why we got to ask a whole bunch, and see how it goes.
Yeah. And I bet Susanna would be game to come on and debate a topic too, because she's very, very knowledgeable, really just a cool researcher. I really enjoy visiting with her. So she's actually giving a talk, the plenary talk at the Biology of Lizards conference that's going on right now.
Wow.
Yeah. Steve Sharp just gave his talk this afternoon on blunt-nosed leopard lizards, the kind of that endangered population in California. They've been doing research on those. And so he invited me to go out there with him and said I could stay in his hotel and all that kind of stuff. And I just didn't have the time to make it out there. I'm really regretting not being able to do that, because that would have been a cool trip. And then I guess he's staying afterwards to run a herp course or in that area, so he'll be out there for a few weeks. And
wow,
yeah, it's going to be I'm sure it'll be a great experience for him. I think they found a really nice desert king last night. He said the rains haven't really hit yet, so he's hoping those monsoon rains will come through within the next week or two and hopefully improve the herping situation. But yeah, I'm really missing that out there. I wish I was there right now.
Absolutely.
But cool spot. I love that area too. I mean, just that whole southern Arizona from the east to the west is just fantastic herping. So, yep, here I am in northern Utah. Hopefully some of these rains coming through here are going to bring stuff out. But right now it's pretty slim pickings. Well, any other ideas on this topic? Have we inspired the listener enough to write down their herp experiences? Or
I sure hope so. I mean, yeah, it's a ton of work. It's a lot easier to just get on the podcast and sort of run our mouths and things. And maybe the answer, at least in part, right, is that at least for some of our source material, we can go back to our initial episodes when we came back, just to have, as you say, so much of it doesn't necessarily diminish the quality, but it probably diminishes the accuracy as time goes by. Yeah,
for sure. But yeah, I don't know, reliving and remembering those experiences, and you maybe don't think that somebody else would enjoy that, or nobody wants to hear my stories, but reading Caulfield. Yeah, did I get it right this time? Yeah, yep. I didn't say clobber. Reading Caulfield's reports and some of these Bruce Means and some of the other kind of first narrative books are really get you excited about getting out there and hopefully having some of the same experiences, even if you aren't able to necessarily rely on their spots or their narrative to help you find them easier. At least kind of the methods they use or the things can be translatable and can help you be a better herper, just reading their experiences. So, I don't know, cool topic. I like thinking about these things, and thanks for fighting with me and discussing these things. Is good stuff. Absolutely. Well, any exciting things you've run across over the last week or two in regards to herpetology, herpetoculture, anything like that?
So this isn't from this week, but I had intended to mention it previously. So there was an Australian herpetoculture podcast from probably a month or 6 weeks ago now, but they were talking to a fellow who was doing quite a bit of field herping in Australia, and he had a whole story. It reminded me when you were talking about WA and private land. Yeah. So the Strophaurus trux, right, is on private land, or at least the vast majority of that very small localized habitat is. Mm-hmm. And he mentioned that they had one night up there and they actually were able to meet up with the landowner. And he indicated that, in exchange for a unit, whatever, a 2 liter of whiskey or whatever it was, that he'd let him poke around that night. And they did to success and all that. So good on them. Good for them.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, it's a good thing to think of if you're trying to get onto private land. Make sure you have appropriate gifts to get yourself there. I'm very excited to get back over to Australia. So October can't come soon enough, but it should be a good time. But I was talking with Steve the other day, and he was talking about Matt. And he's like, oh, you need to talk to Matt. And I'm like, already have. And we're planning on going to a lot of the same places he went because he had a really amazing experience out there. So hopefully we can make it to some of those spots. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we're definitely, a lot of the same ideation and thought process and things. I know he had talked to us beforehand, and then he proceeded to do better than we've ever done up there. So good on him. But
I'm also excited to spend more than a day in Kakadu because that was the extent of my Kakadu experience from before. So, all right. Well, thanks again for listening, and thanks to Eric and Owen and the crew for all their support and for stitching these two sections of our podcast tonight together. Thanks for your help, Eric. And we'll catch you again next time for another episode of Reptile Fight Club.